Welcome to the Tribal Data Toolbox Exercise 16, the last exercise in this course, and it covers how to use the Tribal Data Toolbox to create AQS-ready files that you can upload into EPA's national database. And this is a picture of Delbert Altaha at White Mountain Apache measuring flow rate, doing a flow rate check of his TOM at his McNary site, I believe. And Delbert has used the toolbox for years to generate AQS-ready files and is an inspiration to all of us for his hard work. So the exercise says that we are basically going to go in and create these files ready to upload into AQS, and it gives specific instructions for the date. And the first one is for Site 1 from 8/8 through 8/22/2006, and then we're going to name it a particular name, which is always a good idea in terms of data management. So we're going to go into the toolbox. And in the last exercise, exercise 15, we imported a set of AQS monitor protocol data, and we also hand entered a set. Now that we've done that, we're ready to generate files. So we're going to go ahead and click on this button, AQS Data File Creation. So we go ahead and select the parameter for Site ID 1, Sampler ID Instrument 1, POC 1, we've got ozone, and then we have the codes that we've already entered into the toolbox. Parts per billion are the units, and sample duration hourly. The dates of the 8th of August through the 22nd of August. And the toolbox has this option to add zero value continuous pollutant records to your file if you've got data gaps. This is often useful if you have been monitoring for a while and you have a big set of data to upload and you do have gaps in your data, but you want to include records for all of the hours in that contiguous set of data so that you have a record that you were trying to analyze, but due to some malfunction you don't have data. So you can always click this button just first to see if you have missing records, and it will analyze it. And before adding these temporary zeros for the missing hours, it'll tell you you've got 24 missing. It can take a while to do this if you've got more than about 100 records to add. We've got 24. So we'll click OK, and you can look at the bottom of the form to see how the query is going in the taskbar. In this case it's pretty fast, but you can see down here in the green bar, and it says, okay, it's added temporary zero value records for the gaps, for the missing hours. So let's look at the data first. And we can see what it did is it basically said, okay, we're assuming you want to start at midnight, which may or may not be what you want to add. And it added this invalidation code of AF, scheduled but not collected. Then we've got our ozone values. Then we've got some invalidation codes here. If you remember, I think these were those negative 6,999 values. And then we've got some codes here. This was because the shelter door blew open, if I remember correctly, and then we've got these scheduled but not collected null value codes. So we say okay, click the lower X, then create the file, and we say okay, create it, and now it's in the folder, and it's called AQS_RD.txt. Click OK, and let's look at it. And here we see a beautiful file, and we've got our codes correctly for ozone, for the method, for the dates, and you can see the way it works in the AQS file, where if you had a value that was valid, it shows up in the column, but instead of that value is the null value code. If you have gone through and invalidated records, what will show up instead of the value is the null value code. So we have created the first, and we want to follow the directions, so we're going to save it, and we're going to save it according to directions called ozone underscore 082206 MRB. So we go back into the toolbox and we select the values from the drop-down list that pertain to outdoor temperature 62101 and the Vizsla and the units of Fahrenheit at hourly intervals from the 11th of August through the 11th of August. Let's look at the data. And these zero values are not possible to add for metadata, only pollutant. So let's first inspect the data, and we see, okay, we've got data that goes from midnight to 11 o'clock. That's good. And we've got some invalidated data, and it looks appropriate. So now let's create the AQS file, and it tells us that it has been created. And what happens is every time you create a new one, it automatically writes over the old one. So that's why we have to carefully save each of these with a new name. So we're going to say, okay, now let's view it. And now we're going to save it. So we're going to save it with this name according to the directions, save. And now we can get out of this because we've saved it elsewhere and go on to the next part of the assignment. And the next two steps are both for PM2.5 filter data, but the first step is to assign an AQS flag that is not an invalidation code, but just a flag for high pollen count on one day, the 24th. So we are going to go back into the toolbox and now look for PM2.5. It's at our second site, and we're looking at instrument 2, POC1, parameter PM2.5 local conditions, the FRM sampler, the RMP 2000, and the units are micrograms per cubic meter. Now you could see that if you selected liters per minute, that would relate to your QC data that you will upload to AQS. But right now we're looking at the concentration, micrograms per cubic meter, and for 24-hour samples. So we want to look at just the data on the 24th and assign an AQS flag. This is only optional. And you can see that there are three kinds of flags that you can add. Informational, where you're telling EPA something like high winds or high pollen counts. A quality assurance flag or request exclusion flag. So we're going to add an informational flag and then click on manually add AQS flags. And that pulls up the data in a query window. And over here, you may have to pull this out by hovering your cursor over till it becomes this left-right black arrow, and pull this out to see the full header, AQS flag. And then you can click in this box, just as with the AQS null value codes when you enter them line by line. And we are to look at high pollen count. And you can see that there would be informational, possibly fireworks, fires, demolition, accidents, infrequent large gatherings, seismic activity, some kind of interesting ones. So we're going to add this high pollen count here. And if you remember, if you have a lot of data to have the code above repeated, you press, put your cursor in it, and then press your control and then the quote button. And that's useful if you had many, many rows. You just click in it, press control, and then the quotation button, and it copies whatever is in the field above. That's good. We only have two. We added that flag, so we click the lower X on that query window. Now we can inspect the data. And if you scroll over, you could see all this metadata is here. Excuse me, not the metadata, the PM2.5, and we've got those AQS flags added. And finally, we've got the calculated value for PM2.5 concentration. That's just for the 24th. So we've added those flags, but now we want to create a file of data for the entire month. So I'm just going to say 8/1 through 8/31, and I'm going to inspect the data. And you could see for PM2.5 filter, it's not as much data as obviously for hourly data. We've got our data here. We've got one invalidation code. That was when the timer didn't go to 24 hours. We've got 2 field blanks, and those obviously don't have concentrations. So we're good. Now we create the AQS file, and now again it's always named the same name, so we say OK, and what that means is it creates it and wrote it over the last one. So let's look at it and now save it with its new name so that it doesn't get written over in the next step. So we're going to say save as, and I'm saving it with this new name. I click save and then ready to go on to the next part of the assignment. And that is to generate files for your QC checks. So in order to evaluate the data and its validity, EPA requests that you submit the results of your QC checks as well. And this also helps them in terms of assessing whether or not so many QC checks are necessary, and how many they need to look at the overall validity of the entire country's data set. So first we want to generate a file for ozone precision data. So that's when we challenge the instrument with a known concentration from Site 1 for the month of August the 8th through the 22nd. So we're going to go into the toolbox and we're going to say Site 1, Instrument 1, POC 1, ozone, and our QC for ozone is in ozone parts per billion units because we are challenging the analyzer with a known concentration of ozone, and that's what these files consist of. And we want to generate the data just from the 8th through the 22nd. And we are not looking at raw data here. We want to look at the precision data. So these are the QC checks that you make. So let's inspect the data. And it says if you have a co-located sampler, we don't for ozone. We're going to click OK. And we see the data here. And you could see that the actual value, so that's the known concentration of ozone squirted in from our ozone calibrator to our analyzer. Our analyzer measured 54 parts per billion and the known concentration was 55. And here the ozone analyzer measured 55.4 when the known concentration was 55. So we're doing very well, and we definitely want to report this data to EPA. So we will say create an AQS-RP, so that's precision file, and it tells us that it's created a file AQS_RP, so that's our first RP file, is in our 2.1 folders. We say OK, and now we look at it, and voila, not very extensive, but we actually understand what this consists of now. So now we need to make sure that we save it. So I've saved it according to the directions, so I'm really specific about what this is, and I've added my initials, so I say save, and now time to go on to the next part of the exercise. And the next exercise is to generate bias data. So this is data that was generated during some sort of external audit with a flow rate transfer standard that's not the one that you usually use. For PM2.5 for Site 2 for the 5th of August, so we know that we must have had an audit come. So we're going to go back into the toolbox and we are going to look at Site 2, Sampler 2, POC1. And this is a little confusing. We are generating a file that consists of flow rate, but really a percentage, how the percentage off of flow rate, but we're really sending a file to EPA that consists of a QC check on our parameter that we're measuring. So PM2.5 local conditions is what this audit row of data on the 5th pertains to. So we're going to select that, and we're using an RMP 2000. And in this case, however, instead of micrograms per cubic meter for the pollutant concentration, we are going to select liters per minute of flow rate and sample duration 24 hours. And this pertains to how far off we are, again, if you remember. So we're looking at just the date of the 5th. And now in this case, we're going to use this block of data here. So first, let's click Inspect Data. And we only have one row, but that's appropriate because this was data that you entered in that QC check form. And this was an audit that was done, and you could see that there were different flow rates, actual and indicated. So that's the data that we want. So we'll click the lower X, and now we'll create the AQS file, and it creates it with a new name with the ending _RA. Click OK, and now let's look at it. And here it is, and you could see that this looks like gobbledygook to other people, but you understand it. So you could see that we've got those actual and indicated flow rates there, and it's a performance evaluation. So we have created this file, which will also be uploaded to EPA's AQS, and then they will know that we have conducted an audit, and we will have an estimate of our accuracy or overall bias. So we will save this with the name as instructed, ending with our initials. We'll click Save. We'll get out of this because we've saved it securely. We will exit the form, and now you should make a backup copy of this toolbox and save it, and you have to make an entry in your database logbook and email your instructor the files that you just created. And you need to pat yourself on the back very heartily because you have finished this online course. You know you can email or call me or Angelique anytime with questions. We are here to support you. But congratulations and hooray!